Hello and welcome to Political Science 101 or History 101. This is the history of the American political system. This week we are on Chapter 12 and we are talking about the presidency. Chapter 12, Presidency. We're going to start with our learning outcomes and we're going to try again the coordination of both the PowerPoint and the live video lecture. Or taped video lecture. Okay, so here we go. All right. Our learning outcomes for this chapter are list the constitutional requirements for becoming president, explain the roles that a president adopts while in office, indicate the scope of presidential powers, which is really interesting because it changes from president to president. You can see a progression of different presidents actually taking on different responsibility and then kind of passing that baton to the one behind them. Very interesting, almost like it is organic and is a growing type of office. Describe advantages enjoyed by Congress and by the president in their institutional relationship. Discuss the organization of the executive branch and the role of cabinet members in the presidential administration. Okay, who can become president? Presidential age and occupation, race, gender, and religion. Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution states no person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of president. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained to the age of 35 and been 14 years a resident within the United States. So you see, you do need to be a citizen of the United States, a natural-born one. So I know there was a lot of talk of, Arnold Schwarzenegger as he was governor. He could not be because he is Austrian, unless, of course, it was amended, which probably would be highly unlikely at this time. 35 is the age limit, and so you could be a natural-born citizen born in another country, but you need to live here for 14 years. Interesting that is only 14 years, actually. It's kind of surprising. Perks of the president. You have the use of the White House and staff, fleets of automobiles, helicopters, jets, Camp David, which who wouldn't mind that? Free dental and health, medical care. Presidential age and occupation. Most common previous occupation of the president has been in the legal profession. Must be 35 and older to be president. The average age is 55. Very interesting. Race, gender, and religion. Historically, presidents have been white, male, or of Protestant religious descent. In 1960, the first Roman Catholic president was elected. And your book also mentioned that I believe it was Alfred Smith. Ooh, I believe so. Alfred Smith, Al Smith in 1928 was the first Democrat to run on a major ticket as a Roman Catholic. So, and then in 1960, JFK was the first Catholic president. Okay, 2008 Democratic primary was between a white woman, Hillary Clinton, and an African American man, Barack Obama. Both historic milestones. All right, and that was the election that I actually worked as a poll worker the Obama election year, which was really just an amazing experience for me. Okay, in 2012, the Republican candidate Mitt Romney was a Mormon. So, that was huge as well for the Republican Party. And of course, this year, in 2016, we have a woman who is the nominee. Whether you care for her or not, which is really not here or there, factually, that is huge in America. So that's a huge milestone that has never been, has never happened before. President's many roles. I really like this section on the president's many roles. I loved on page 268 where it has a picture of Woodrow Wilson, who was throwing out the first pitch on opening day for MLB baseball in 1916. And they asked you which one of the president's roles would this have been: chief executive, commander-in-chief, head of state, chief diplomat, chief legislator, or political party leader. And if you read the roles of the president, which is fantastic, they have a lovely chart right here, you would find that it actually would be head of state, where you are awarding war heroes, decorating war heroes for their sacrifice, performing ceremonial activities as a personal symbol of the nation. Okay. I also wanted to mention in 2012, for the Republican Party, I wanted to also mention, it did mention Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum were both Catholic, and I'll be really honest, I did not know that Newt Gingrich was, and that was another, new kind of space for the Republican Party, being very diverse. And again, it talks about Mitt Romney also being a Mormon at the bottom of that. Okay, which roles a president executes successfully usually depends on what is happening domestically, which I think is a really kind of a wise tidbit to look at. And then they go on to talk about Bill Clinton. He was much more interested in domestic policy rather than foreign policy, whereas they contrast that with George H.W. Bush, who was more interested in foreign affairs than domestic ones. So, sometimes it's personal preference, sometimes it's what's going on at home, sometimes it's kind of what their personality tailors to. Okay. Very interesting, on page 270, they talk about, under the Constitution, war powers are divided between Congress and the president, and that is going on. They're going through the list of, he's the chief executive, which means the president enforces the laws, federal court decisions, along with treaties approved by the United States. Now, he can make a treaty, but it has to be approved by Congress. He can appoint with Senate approval and remove high-ranking officers. He can grant reprieves, pardons, and amnesties. And I loved how they pointed out that, a pardon can be a whole group. President Carter pardoned or gave amnesty to Vietnam War, those who escaped the draft or did not agree with the war, and what page is that on? That was really interesting. Trying to see. There it is on page 273. Jimmy Carter granted amnesty to tens of thousands of people who had resisted the draft during the Vietnam War by failing to register for the draft or by moving abroad. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. His many roles. We started to talk about that already. Chief Executive, also Article 2 of the Constitution, Commander-in-Chief, the power to deploy the armed forces. Head of State, acts as country's representative to the rest of the world. And again, I really want to urge you to look at page 269. It really details nicely what each of his offices are, or his or her offices are. Chief diplomat, chief legislator, the Constitution requires that the president from time to time give to the Congress information on the State of the Union address, and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. He's the political party leader. Again, I love this picture because it is Woodrow Wilson throwing out the first pitch in 1916, which, they ask you, which of the roles is he doing? And this is the head of state. Okay, the president's constitutional powers, the president's inherent powers, and the president's, the expansion of presidential powers, which again, I was mentioning earlier. Constitutional powers, debating the Constitution, specified powers, proposal, ratification of treaties, The power of grand reprieves and pardons, very interesting. One of the most controversial pardons, of course, was Gerald Ford, who pardoned President Richard Nixon. Very controversial, and probably one of the most famous pardons. Okay. Where I lost myself here. Okay. Pardons, where did they go? Okay, the veto power, the veto in recent administrations, and the line item veto. I was really amazed at the veto numbers, and I thought it was really interesting. Okay, and it talks about how many times FDR. Okay, Johnson vetoed 21 bills, which, okay, that sounds, normal. This is on page 273. FDR, who I have to say, I love him. He was a little bit feisty there at the end of his presidency. And of course, then, he died in office. But he, an amazing president, and absolutely wonderful to study. But it says here that he vetoed 263 pocket vetoes and 372 regular vetoes. Okay, that's a lot. Right, and then it goes on to address Obama and Bush's vetoes, and those were really interesting as well. It said that George W. vetoed once in his first 4 years, and Obama only vetoed twice in his first 4 years. Just really interesting, and to compare those numbers and to, look at the huge differences. All right, let's keep going. All right, presidential powers. Jimmy Carter, he met with Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin at the White House for signing of the Camp David Accords in September. All right. Egypt and Israel have remained at peace with each other. Jimmy Carter might not have been the greatest president in the numbers, but he is still considered to be a diplomat. That was like one of his big strengths. Very interesting, this picture. They had a question for you. Would negotiating such agreements help a president politically, and why or why not? I think I'm really going to, for this week's discussion, put a lot of these questions about the presidency and really get you to think, and make sure that you're using factual information about presidents, and not opinions. And we need to make sure that that's the way that you argue when you're arguing history. All right, facts, evidence, examples. Okay. Again, President Bill Clinton used the line item veto powers to eliminate nearly 40 projects worth $287 million from a military construction bill in 1997. Very interesting when you talk about the budget. That actually Bill Clinton in his economic plan was a centrist, which means he took the domestic practices of the Democrats, helping the poor, education, that sort of thing. But then when it came to the budget, he was a conservative, and he used conservative Republican ideologies. Now, you have to be careful, because when you look at, conservative, budget ideologies, less taxes, and that sort of thing, you have to be careful when it was the Cold War and that sort of timing. It does talk about Reagan in our other American history class, how he spent trillions on defense, which then later those nuclear bombs that were made were disarmed. So it was really wasted money. And may have actually caused the Cold War to continue longer than it should have. Although Reagan was an excellent president in the fact that he was a communicator, which you need to understand, because he was a Democrat for 30 years before he switched to Republican. So he was able to communicate with both sides, which is just excellent. Just that's just an excellent attribute to have anyway. So anyway, one